recording it. And good morning and hello, everybody up in Massachusetts. My name is Evan Weiner. My background is radio and TV, and I used to do some stuff long ago for WEEI Radio in Boston. I've done radio, television, written for newspapers, written for magazines, written for the internet. And I'm a little familiar with the history of TV, more so with the history of radio, because way back in 1978, my 500-watt radio station did a 2-hour Sunday block called The Theater of the Imagination, Old Time Radio. And Lucille Ball was very briefly part of Old Time Radio, and it was Old Time Radio that launched her career into TV. Lucille Ball should never have been the most powerful businesswoman in Hollywood. In fact, she should never have been on I Love Lucy or the radio show My Favorite Husband, or even the Chesterfield cigarette model back in the late 1920s. She was born in Jamestown, New York, which is in southwestern New York. She is born on August 6, 1911. And let me tell you how this talk came about. I was doing a Zoom talk in Chester, New Jersey, the Chester Library, and it was on the early days of TV. And Danellen, who is the woman who runs programs for that library, said that last 5 minutes of your talk on the early days of TV was about how Lucy was the most powerful woman in TV. Her birthday is August 6th. Can you do a talk? We're looking at August 5th. Just on Lucy. This is about 7 weeks ago. I said, sure, and put it together real quick. And a lot of people have enjoyed it so far because they were I Love Lucy fans. I don't know if they enjoyed me telling the story, but they enjoyed it because they were I Love Lucy fans. And she should never have been what she became. Her father was a telephone lineman who died in 1915. She was about 4 years old. And that left Lucille and her mother Desiree, along with Desiree's father and mother Fred and Flora Bell Hunt. Fred Hunt inadvertently almost derailed the I Love Lucy show in the 1950s, but he raised her. She is the most unlikely of Hollywood moguls. At the age of 17, she left her upstate New York high school for Broadway. She saw the bright lights. She was going to trip. What's the old expression? Well, whatever it is, she was the roar of the grease paint and trip the light fantastic. That's what it is. And she gets down to New York, and she goes to acting school. Betty Davis is in her class in acting school, and they just tell Lucy, "Hey, you don't have it. Just go home. Go home. You know, it's no big shame not having it." Lots of people come to Broadway and lots of them don't have it. Very few succeed. But she decided, no, that wasn't me. 1928 to about 1947, she bounced around and bounced around and bounced around. And subsequently, the School of Hard Knocks taught her a few things like who's talented, who's not, and maybe you should look out for yourself, because in 1950, she came up with the idea of Desilu. To protect herself and protect her whatever properties that she was developing. Desilu without Desi. By 1962, Lucy is the president and owner of Desilu Studios, and she's got to make some decisions on shows. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but she is the mother of Star Trek. Without Lucy, there is no Star Trek. A Desilu production in association with Norway Corporation. That is the end of a Star Trek episode. As an executive, she rebuilt the studio in 1960. Subsequently became Hollywood's most powerful businesswoman at a time when Betty Friedan was writing The Feminine Mystique and Gloria Steinem was she was a Playboy bunny writing undercover for a magazine. At a time when Bella Abzug was looking to get some political power, and other people as well forming the National Organization for Women but she did this all before even the book The Feminine Mystique came out. She took control of the company, 100% ownership, the first woman to own the studio. And three of her shows would become very successful movie franchises: Mission Impossible, The Untouchables, and that billion-dollar industry known today as Star Trek. Something nobody wanted. There she is as a model. She gets to New York when she's 17 and she decides, I like this. I want to stay here. And she does a lot of things to make money to survive in New York, including being a Chesterfield model for Chesterfield cigarettes. She also was a nude model for a little while. She somehow came up with rheumatoid arthritis. Now, my wife has rheumatoid arthritis, and that is a chronic illness. And apparently, she recovered. So I'm not really sure if it was ever rheumatoid arthritis that she had, but she had something. I'm going to shut that because I'm not competing with it. There we go. The foibles of being in the backyard. Anyway, so she was a model. She would do anything to survive in New York, and she barely did. But then she said, hey, let me give it one more shot. I'm only 22 years old. Let me go to Hollywood and let me see if I can make some mark on Hollywood. And she becomes a Goldwyn girl. But then again, there were hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of Goldwyn girls, Shmuel Goldfish or Samuel Goldwyn. But she would get a part eventually in a movie starring Eddie Cantor, who at that time in his career was on the top. Eddie Cantor just came out with the song Making Whoopee, and he was a performer and he was very popular at the time. But she kind of washed out as a Golden Girl. In an effort to survive in Hollywood, Lucille becomes a stunt girl, which means jumping from horse to horse or falling out of a building, whatever it took. She was going to make it. She was determined. And she caught the eye of this guy, Buster Keaton, big star of the 1920s silent movie era, who did a lot of physical comedy. And he saw some talent in her work. And he said to Harry Cohn over at Columbia University, you know, this woman has something. Why don't you take a look? Because Buster Keaton saw some comedic promise in Lucy, and he helped her with her timing and her ability to use props for laughs. And he showed her how to perform physical comedy without getting hurt. So she's this physical, which is amazing if she did have rheumatoid arthritis, that she was able to do all this stuff physically. But she did. And so he calls Harry Cohn, get her into a movie. And he does. Well, it's not quite a movie. It's a two-reeler starring the Three Stooges. Moe, Larry, Curly on the left, and the brunette, Lucille Ball. And she is in a short, which was about 18 minutes, called Three Little Pigskins. Her first venture into the world of comedy, and she thought she did well. So well that when she went on in life that she credited the Three Stooges with helping her with slapstick and physical comedy, you know, pokes to the eyes, slap, pulling hair, all that other stuff. She learned it on the lot with the Three Stooges. Harry Cohn wasn't very impressed at all. And didn't think she had any talent. Gone, you're out of here. But she wants to survive in Hollywood. And she runs into RKO Studios, gets a job as a bit player, but she's in the big movie from 1937 called Stage Door. And there is Lucy, there is Ginger Rogers. She plays Ginger Rogers' dance partner. A guy by the name of Gregory LeCavalier cast her to play Rogers' dance partner in Stage Door. I don't know if it's a step up or a step down from Fred Astaire. I guess it was a step down at that point. And that also starred Katharine Hepburn and Miller and Eve Arden. Eve Arden would work for Desi Arnaz in a show called The Mothers-in-Law in 1966 on NBC TV after Lucy and Desi split the company, or Desi split the company. The movie was supposed to be RKO's big effort for the year, and it was quite the hit at the box office, but doesn't do anything for her career. 26 years old at this point, still young enough, but time is beginning to run out because younger people are getting to Hollywood, and she's 26 already. She ends up over at MGM and ends up with another famous comedy team, Harpo, Chico, Groucho. And there she is in between Chico and Groucho. She's in the movie Room Service, not the greatest of the Marx Brothers movies. In fact, it's down low. Not up there with Duck Soup or Horse Feathers or Night at the Opera or Day at the Races, but she gets exposure. Tell them Groucho sent you. And so they would appear with the Marx Brothers over at MGM. For many years, she struggled in Hollywood and she took anything that came her way, hard-boiled dramas, romantic comedies. And she was in so many of these movies that she was known as the Queen of B Pictures, which wasn't exactly a compliment, but it was work, and she kept working. In 1940, her life would change. She got some notice in the movie and met that guy. That guy was a 20-year-old actor, 21-year-old actor who had a band on the side named Desi Arnaz. Desi's family was a rich family in Cuba, but they fled, left everything behind, ended up in Miami Beach. Desi formed the band, went out to Hollywood to see if he could become a big-time performer, but he kind of washed down in the movies. She was in the movie Dance Girl Dance. She was in the role of Bubbles. Gets some notice finally. She's 29 years old, finally gets some notice. And then she appears in a movie, oddly enough, called Too Many Girls, which would be the story of Lucy and Desi's marriage. And she meets Desi Arnaz. And the 29-year-old Lucy and the 21-year-old Desi elope in November of 1940. But Lucy is busy making movies. Desi washes out and decides, well, I got a band. I can make money going around the country. I got the band. So they never saw each other. And by 1944, Lucy has said, that's enough. I'm out of here. I'm out of here. I hear he's drinking. I hear about all the women. I can't do that anymore. She's 33 years old and she's a working actress and he's only 25. But they decide to reconcile and that would launch them into business. She was the queen of the B movies, the Fuller Brush Girl, Lucille Ball, Eddie Albert. Eddie Albert and Lucy would share something in the 1950s, which could have derailed both of their careers. In the 1940s, she was in films like Her Husband's Affairs. It's kind of interesting because she knew all about Desi's affairs. Miss Grant Takes Richmond with William Holden. The Fuller Brush Girl with Eddie Albert in two Bob Hope movies, Sorrowful Jones and Fancy Pants. Now here's the question. Did television kill the radio star? There is Lucy in front of a microphone doing a radio show. Back then, the radio shows, the people who were the stars of the show weren't the actors or actresses. They were the sound guys. So, you could hear a horse or whatever else that you heard, the sound effects. They were the stars of the show. The actors were merely actors reading off a script. And that's what Lucy is doing. You really didn't even have to memorize the script. All you had to do is be familiar with the script and get in front of a microphone and just read. That was how radio was back in those days. A show comes along, a pilot show, a test show called My Favorite Husband. It wasn't designed to be on the air initially. It was basically a test show to see how Lucy would do starring in the show. And it turned out that CBS could not get Our Miss Brooks on the air July 5th, 1948. So what are we going to do? Well, we got this show on the shelf called My Favorite Husband. Why don't we just put it on? Nobody's going to really care. We're just filling up some time here. That's about it. And we'll fill up time, and next week we'll have Our Miss Brooks. But something funny happened on the way to obscurity. Lucille Ball and Lee Bowman played the characters of Liz and George Cooper. And they got a positive response to this broadcast. And CBS said, hey, wait a minute. This fill-in is actually pretty good. Why don't we do it? The audience liked it. Advertisers liked it. We liked it. So we'll throw it on. Bowman wasn't available to do the series, so it debuts in August of 1948. And you got Lucy there, and you got a new lead in Richard Denning. So here it is. 37-year-old Lucille Ball is finally getting some notice, not on Broadway, not in the movies, but on radio. Radio, a medium that's dying by this point because it's about ready to compete with TV. And even the big radio people of those days, Bill Paley at CBS, David Sarnoff at NBC, realized the future was TV, not radio. And they started putting a lot of money into TV and pulling money out of radio. And there is the redheaded Lucy, my favorite husband. Again, reading from the scripts, Richard Denning on the right, Lucy on the left. My favorite husband featured Lucille Ball opposite Richard Denning. The show was written by Jess Oppenheimer, Madeline Pugh, and Bob Carroll Jr. If you are an I Love Lucy fan from the TV show and you watch the credits at the end, you'll recognize those names. They were the writers of My Favorite Husband, and the writers made the show. And all of them would move to television by 1951, with the exception of Denning. Radio show becomes I Love Lucy. My Favorite Husband, two people who live together and like it. My Favorite Husband was the first radio series to star motion picture musical comedy performer, not star, Lucille Ball. Her co-star was the CBS comedy show was Richard Denning. Ball and Denning were Liz and George Cooper, a happy couple who would get themselves involved in all kinds of domestic scraps. Told you who the writers were. And oh, by the way, they had best friends, the Atterberries. The show would have best friends, the Mertzes. And also the band was conducted by Wilbur Hatch. He would conduct the band on the Desi and Lucy, I Love Lucy show, the Desi Arnaz band. So virtually everybody moves over from the radio show, which was sponsored by Jell-O. CBS looks at the radio show and yeah, they're filling time on television. It's all hit and miss on television at that point. CBS had Toast of the Town, which was the Ed Sullivan show, which survived the early days, but most of their early shows didn't survive. And they go to Lucy and say, hey, how about a TV show? 1950. She's 39 years old. She's had some success on radio, but she hasn't had success on the screen yet. And television was looked down upon by actors and actresses back at that point because they didn't know anything about it. And by 1950, there may have been 500,000 TVs, maybe a little more, that were being in use. So, oh yeah, she jumps at it, except she makes demands. And she is in no position to make demands, none. She's okay on this radio show, but she doesn't have a track record of being a big star. And radio is kind of on the way out, but she makes demands. And she's also old. She's 39 years old, but she makes demands. Her first requirement for any show, Desi Arnaz, a Cuban, would play the husband. Maybe because she wanted to save their marriage. CBS says, no. Jell-O, the sponsor of the radio show, and maybe the sponsor of the TV show, says, oh, wait a minute. No, it's not going to work. The American public is not going to accept Desi as your husband. You're a red-blooded American girl from Western New York. CBS and Jell-O said, Richard Denning does well on radio. Let's keep him going. Jell-O decides, you know what? We don't want to play around with this. Too much trouble. Philip Morris would become the sponsor. Lucy had the motive of saving her marriage, keeping Desi home 39 weeks a year. And seemed like a good idea, working together. Yes, they were married in real life, legally married in real life. Nobody could take that away from them. They were legally married. But CBS had some doubts about Desi. He was Cuban, a strong Cuban accent. He was Cuban and had a strong Cuban accent in a country that might not tolerate it. But they conceded, okay, we want you, Lucy, we want you, Lucy, we want you, Lucy. Here's the problem. Desi and Lucy were an interracial or multi-ethnic couple. And that wasn't flying in 1950. You got to go back to the election of 1876 to understand the whole problem and why CBS had some jitters about Desi being the husband of Lucy on the TV show. Oh yeah, they were married. Yeah, they were married, except on TV you couldn't be in the same bed. You had to have separate beds if you were married. And the other thing about TV is that even if you were a man or a woman, you had to have 1 foot on the floor, 1 foot on the bed, because that was the way it was with television back in those days. But yes, they were married. But interracial marriage was illegal in parts of the US in 1950. The American Civil Rights Movement was stalled since 1875. The segregation in the South ended with the Samuel Tilden, Rutherford B. Hayes presidential race in 1876. Hayes would become president after the Democrats cut a deal with the Republicans. The Democrats said, you know what, Republicans, you could take Hayes, because it was a contested presidency in 1876. You could take Hayes, put him in the Oval Office. We don't care. You could have the Oval Office, but you got to do this for us. Take the federal troops out of the South. Take them out of South Carolina. Take them out of Louisiana. And at that time, interracial marriage in 1876 was illegal in more than a dozen states. Hayes would cooperate. He would take the troops out of South Carolina, out of Louisiana. Civil rights movement was dead in the water at that point. And interracial marriage would be, in 1950, illegal in 17 states and would be illegal until 1967 in the Loving versus Virginia case. Mildred Jeter and Richard Loving, her husband, got married in Washington, moved back to Virginia, and they were both arrested. Interracial couple, and they sued, and finally the Supreme Court ruled in 1967 interracial marriage was legal. So now you can see why CBS was really hesitant about Desi and Lucy on TV. They decided also, Lucy and Desi, to show the world that they can perform together. And they formed Desilu, and they go around the country performing as husband and wife before crowds of people in the summer of 1950. It works. People accepted them. People didn't even look at them as an interracial couple. Everything was fine. So they go on tour. They proved to CBS that Desi would be believable as a husband. And they decide, you know what? Instead of having CBS put the money up for this pilot demonstration show to show how they would work on TV, we want to own the show. So we got $5,000 of our own money. And with that $5,000 of our own money, we are going to film the pilot. It's going to be ours. Not going to be CBS. It's going to be ours. Smart move. Lucy also had other business demands, and CBS was going crazy. She wanted Carl Frahm to shoot the show on film for her. Oh, but more importantly, she wanted the show to be done in Los Angeles. And here's the problem. Shows were done live out of both New York and Chicago, and there was a connection between New York and Chicago, Los Angeles on the other side of the country. And basically the shows outside of New York and Chicago were live and shot on with a camera, and it was called Kinescope, and those tapes or those videos would be cycled to other stations around the country. If you did it in Los Angeles and you flew it to New York, the audiences in New York, Boston would see second-rate video. And that was totally unheard of at that point. And so Lucy and Desi come up with the idea, hey, we'll just shoot it with 35mm film. Have a live studio audience watching it, and we'll have 3 cameras going at once. We'll edit it together. Not going to broadcast live. Toasted Town was live. A lot of those shows in the 1950s, Playhouse 90, Studio One, a lot of them were live. And CBS is looking like, Really? You can do this in LA? Who's going to pay for the film? We're not. Goodbye. But there was a precedent. Tell them Groucho sent you. You bet your life. That was shot on film. Also, Your Showtime in the Stu Irwin Show and The Life of Riley, starring William Bendix. A guy by the name of Jerry Fairbanks developed and used multiple camera film productions for television starting in 1950. 1951 would be the year I Love Lucy started. Groucho used it in 1950. And Lucy knew talent. She was banging around and banging around and banging around and banging around for years, decades. And she saw who was talented and who wasn't. Desi, she felt, had talent. And this is the reason why. He had good comedic timing. He had an expressive face. And he had that fluster as Ricky Ricardo that you might remember, that he got so angry with her all the time. And also because he was Cuban, he mispronounced and Latinized words, added to the comedy. Within 4 months of its debut, I Love Lucy was #1 in New York, and the national audience soon followed. So it's a smash hit. It should go on forever. Lucy and Ethel. And that's the subplot of the whole I Love Lucy episodes. There's the marriage dynamic with Ricky. She wants to be a showbiz star. He doesn't want her on stage. And then there's that sub relationship between the two women who are getting themselves into all kind of trouble. It's a smash hit. Should go on for a number of years without any problems. CBS is happy. Not only are they happy with the show, they're not paying for it. Lucy and Desi are paying for it. So there's an increase in production costs, and Lucy and Desi will pay for it. They own the rights to the film. Turns out to be a brilliant business move. At the time, 1951, nobody thought anybody would want to watch a rerun. You saw it once, big deal. You're not going to watch it again, even though part of that country didn't have too many TVs in 1951. They were getting there in 1951, but not every place, like South Dakota didn't have any television stations. The deal was Lucy and Desi got the ownership rights to I Love Lucy in exchange for a $1,000 salary pay cut. Okay, everything is great. Going into year number 2, problem. Lucy's pregnant. And this is a television problem, a big TV problem. Lucy and Desi, 1 year of success, that might have been it. Just might have been a 1 year flash because she found out she's going to have a second baby. And let's go back to 1952 America. America on TV, America on stage, America in the movies. It was considered too racy for a visibly pregnant woman to be allowed on TV. Television had censorship. Television had a lot of censorship, a lot more than you ever thought in the early days of TV. Lucy and Desi were not allowed to say the word pregnant, part of the censorship. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Because women, you never saw women on stage being pregnant. Jess Oppenheimer has an idea. Let's write. He's the showrunner. He runs the show, and he's the head writer. He says, let's write the pregnancy into the show. CBS has a problem with this. A visibly pregnant woman had never appeared on stage or television before. It's a big risk for everybody concerned. Television at this point is only 6 years old. So Lucy, Desi, and Oppenheimer have to think, what are we going to do? CBS and the show sponsor, could we get away with this? Show sponsor, Philip Morris. The storyline worked. CBS said, okay. We're making money on this thing. You're making money on this thing. Let's not kill the golden goose. And they tell Lucy, okay, we'll let you be on. We'll let people see you're pregnant. Hey, I don't know. You see pregnant women on the streets all the time. My daughter-in-law's pregnant right now. I never thought there was anything wrong with that. And some of the scripts did address the topic, but in 1952, they walked a fine line here because the executives at CBS wanted to make sure the episodes didn't cause too much of a stir for people who might be very upset that a woman is pregnant. Go figure, 1952 America. So Lucy and Desi have to overcome this problem. In the early fall, according to a book that Lucy wrote, when I was beginning to look pretty big, we did 7 shows concerning my pregnancy. These films were screened by a priest, a minister, and a rabbi for any possible violation of good taste. It was the CBS network that objected to using the word pregnant. They made us say expecting. So a priest, a minister, and a rabbi go down to a studio to watch a show. The 3 men, religious committee, watches the show and they protest. They have to protest. That's biblical, right? What's wrong with pregnant? They were hardly in favor of what we were doing. Showing motherhood as a happy, wholesome, normal family event. They survived. And the pregnancy was written into the scripts and became a very popular TV audience-driven show. Those shows, including the last one when she does give birth on the show, January 19th, 1953. Oddly enough, she gave birth in real life on that day, January 19th, 1953. During the second season, she's pregnant. She's going to miss some of the shows. There are 39 episodes, and she couldn't make it. At that point, television, the show program once, never again. So this creates a problem. So Desi and Jess Oppenheimer say, got all those shows, 39 shows sitting on the shelf from last year. Why don't we try it? What do we got to lose? We'll put the show on again. Audiences loved it. They loved watching it again. The reruns, rating winners. And inadvertently, Lucy, because she's pregnant, Desi and Jess create a new area for TV called syndication or reruns, where you take the show that ran once and you sell it to a TV station, or in this case, CBS Network pays for it. And hey, you make money for doing nothing, and the audiences are watching. Desilu goes on to invent the concept of the rerun. They would use the profits from the I Love Lucy show syndication to grow their studio. Because of this, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. Desi wasn't wanted in 1950. By 1952, Lucy and Desi are television's first millionaires, worth now maybe $11 million. Eisenhower becomes president January 20th, 1953. Dwight Eisenhower takes the oath of office with the Supreme Court head justice, Earl Warren, giving him or getting the oath from him. And it draws a lot of people, but Lucy draws more people. Well, part of it's at night, and Dwight Eisenhower is during the day, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, January 20th. But on January 19th, 1953, giving birth to little Ricky, Lucy gets about 44 million viewers. Ike gets 15 million less viewers. Okay, they survived the pregnancy, survived the interracial marriage. This has to go on. You know, nothing's going to stop us except this. Registered red in 1936, Lucille. Star denies she voted commie. Well, before I talk about Lucy, I want to put Lucy in her time. Talk about some of the other people that were around who also were accused of being communists. The communist accusation started with a Hollywood Reporter in 1947. When a writer and the owner of the Hollywood Reporter started naming names without any attribution, saying this person's a communist, that person's a communist, like Dalton Trumbo, Howard Koch, and others. They're a communist, without ever proving that they were a communist. This is the world that Lucy was living in post-World War II because they were worried about communist Russia. And here's the proof that she was a communist. 1936 voter registration, affidavit of registration, Lucille Ball, Communist Party. Americans This is what was going on in those days. Americans don't patronize Reds. You can drive the Reds out of the television, radio in Hollywood. This track, Red Channels, this track will tell you how. Why we must drive them out. The Reds have made our screen, radio, and TV Moscow's most effective fifth column in America. The Reds of Hollywood and Broadway have always been the chief financial support of communist propaganda in America. Our own films made by Red producers, directors, writers, and stars are being used by Moscow in Asia, Africa, the Balkans, and throughout Europe to create hatred of America. Right now, films are being made to craftily glorify Marxism. I like Marxism in the 1930s. You couldn't beat Groucho. He was so quick-witted, and Chico was that devious straight man, and Harpo. So yeah, well, I guess it's a different Marxism. Marxism, UNESCO, one worldism. And via your TV set, they are being piped into your living room and poisoning the very minds of your children under your very eyes. So remember, if you patronize a film made by Red producers, writers, stars, studios, you are aiding and abetting communism. Every time you permit Reds to come into your living room via your TV set, you are helping Moscow and the internationalists destroy America. I'm going to just throw this baseball thing in. Cincinnati Reds baseball team, their name was changed to the Redlegs in the 1950s because the Red Scare in the 1950s. They went back to the Reds in the early 1960s. The Red Scare, well, it caused the blacklist of, or the blacklisting, and that involved the practice of denying employment to entertainment industry professionals believed to have been or are communist sympathizers. Not just actors, screenwriters, directors, musicians, some authors, and other American entertainment professionals were barred from work by the studios. I don't know how many of you have heard of this woman. Her name is Pert Kelton. She was the original Alice Cramden on the Cavalcade of Stars Honeymooners on the Dumont Network. 1951, she's gone. 1951, she's gone. Something in her background raised the flag, communist. And the only explanation as to why she's gone is that the producers explained she had alleged heart problems. She was replaced by Audrey Meadows. She didn't have any heart problems. Gleason didn't want to let her go. Jackie did bring her back during the run in Florida as an actress. She was Alice Cramden's mother, Ralph Cramden's mother-in-law in the 1960s Honeymooner sketches, the shows from Miami. Hazel Scott, some of you might have, most of you haven't heard from her because I've done this live, this talk, because I've gotten out about a dozen times and done this talk. And I think only 2 people have ever heard of Hazel Scott while I've done this talk. She was a jazz pianist, went to Juilliard. She was born in Jamaica, ended up marrying the Congressman Adam Clayton Powell III from Harlem. And she is the first woman of color who ever got a television show, a national television show on the Dumont Network. And that was in 1950. But the show would come to an abrupt end in September of 1950 after Scott is named in Red Channels as a communist sympathizer. And she says, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to clear my name before the House on Un-American Activities Committee, and I'm going to defend myself. And she goes down in September to defend herself, and the sponsors and the Dumont Network dropped the show within a week. Philip Loeb. I don't know how many of you have heard of Philip Loeb. If you've read the writings of Zero Mostel, he talks about his friend Philip Loeb, who committed suicide because he was outed as a communist or a communist sympathizer. In 1955, the actor Philip Loeb, who couldn't get any work, checked himself into the Taft Hotel, Midtown Manhattan, under a false name, took a fatal dose of sleeping pills, and that was that. Loeb was accused of being a communist. couldn't find work anymore. 6 years earlier, he was the co-star of TV's first situation comedy, The Goldbergs, created by Gertrude Goldberg. An awful lot of pressure on Gertrude Berg to get rid of Loeb. Lucy was not an employee of CBS. She wasn't an employee. She was an independent contractor because in 1951, CBS workers had to take a loyalty test to show that they were loyal to the United States. That was how bad it got in the entertainment industry. McCarthyism and blackballing. Big deal in the 1950s until Edward R. Murrow took him down. On September 4th, 1953, Lucy gives voluntary testimony to investigator for the House on Un-American Activities Committee and blames everything on her grandfather. It was our grandfather, Fred Hunt. He just wanted us to, and we just did something to please him. I didn't intend to vote that way. As I recall, I didn't. Lucy might have been saved and not suffered the same fate as Hazel Scott and Philip Loeb and Bert Kelton, because J. Edgar Hoover was said to be a big fan of I Love Lucy. Could have saved her from blacklisting. Didn't stop him from continuing to spy on her, because he spied on everybody. Had a book on Mickey Mantle and all these other people. But because he liked the show, they may have laid low on Lucy. And Lucy swore to the House committee she had never knowingly aided the Communist Party, aside from placating her grandfather's many requests for room in the garage to organize with friends. In her autobiography, Lucille Ball observed in herself a strong conservative Puritan streak, said, I'm probably the most conservative member of my family. It was for her grandfather, a progressive and free thinker. She registered as a communist. Eddie Albert would also be accused of being a communist sympathizer. He would survive, and he would play Oliver Wendell Douglas in my favorite dumb TV show of all time in the 1960s, Green Acres. Saving Desi Lu. She goes before the media in Los Angeles, explains herself. She looks fairly confident. Desi is looking down. He knows this is a problem. I don't know how many of you have been to TV shows, comedy shows, but there is an opening act before the show. Somebody would do a comic act. Ray Combs did it for the Johnny Carson show and then ended up on Family Feud because of that. And Desi did it for the I Love Lucy. He would warm up the audience and tell them when to laugh, when to do this, when to do that, etc. And before show number 68 of I Love Lucy, entitled Girls Go Into Business, remember Lucy and Ethel would always have some scheme going into business. Desi does address the accusation that his wife is a communist. And he says the only thing read about Lucy is her hair. And even that is not legitimate. Lucy in the late 1930s, before the CBS microphone, with her real color hair at the age of 28. The only thing red, well, she changed her hair after signing with MGM in 1943. DuBarry Was a Lady debuted. Sydney Garloff changed her hair from brown to red. They saw her in Technicolor, and her name became, or her nickname became, Technicolor Tessie. And I'm not sure that was a compliment. She's not a natural redhead. It was a tough gig, real tough gig. She caught colds, had crying spells, broke 2 fingers, sprained her ankle 3 times, pulled the tendon, sweated off 19 pounds, came down with a virus, went on hiatus while she recovered at the beach. She fainted on stage. She fainted on stage again. The production company put up an oxygen tank in the wings. She fainted again, and then there was Confidential magazine that wanted to come out with a story about Desi's womanizing, and they went to her about it, and she said, oh, I could tell you worse than that. It was a tough gig, and it was catching up to Lucy and Desi. By 1956, 57, they had it. It was just too much of a grind by this point to keep putting out show after show. And not only that, overcoming the interracial marriage thing, in overcoming the pregnancy, overcoming the communist accusations. It was time to pack it up. In 1957, they decided, hey, we got all these shows sitting on the shelf. We don't have a distribution company, so we'll sell the shows back to CBS. They bought it for $5 million, about $55 million today. Bargain, bargain at any price. So they get the shows and they decide to put the shows on again and again and again and again. The rerun industry was born. With that money, Desi and Lucy would purchase the RKO studio lot. She was there in the 1930s in Hollywood, where they filmed other shows, filmed in Hollywood. The Desilu lot in Culver City, some of the shows they had, the Andy Griffith Show, Make Room for Daddy, Mission Impossible, Hogan's Heroes, Batman, That Girl, Star Trek, and a whole bunch of others. Oh, whatever happened to My Favorite Husband? Well, it got to TV under its name, My Favorite Husband. The new leads were Joan Caulfield and Barry Nelson as Liz and George Cooper. For those of you who might watch The Price is Right or Let's Make a Deal or know anything about Los Angeles, in the farmers market is the CBS Television City, which is right next to a high-scale mall now called The Grove. And every time I'm in LA, I do eat at The Grove, and I always pass with my friends. Said, that's where the Bob Barker studio is. It is in that building. So the first 2 years, that show is shot there. The third year, only a half year, the show switches to film and is filmed at Desilu Studios. Lucy, in a way, returns to My Favorite Husband, the vehicle that launched her to stardom. But they have had it. By 1957, they decided to cut back as much as they can. Desi was done with a half-hour sitcom format, and he and Lucy turned down $80,000 an episode. Multiply that by 39, you get $4 million. Today, $40 million or so. Plus $30,000 a repeat. Just make money off something you've done. That's at that point about $500,000, a little less than $500,000 today, $5 million for doing nothing, sitting on your hands. Desi would strike a deal with Ford, the auto company. They gave him $2.5 million to sponsor 5 Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz special. Desi also had health problems. They had to get out. Oh, they had other shows too. The Ann Southern Show, The Untouchables, and Lucy was never. She doesn't have an MBA from Harvard or Yale or Wharton. She's smarter than everybody else. She went to the School of Hard Knocks. She's partially responsible for moving a good chunk of the American television production from New York to Los Angeles. So they come up with a new show. It's called the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse, and that would be the springboard of 2 shows. One of them, The Twilight Zone, an episode. The other, 2 episodes of The Untouchables. Lucy would make her official debut as a producer in 1959 with an episode of Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse, but she was the artistic director of Desilu. So she was doing that anyway. And she knew talent. She really knew talent. If they bring this guy in, Rod Serling, they look at his show, yeah, we'll do it here on the lot. And they do. It's called The Time Element. Stars William Bendix. Show gets positive reviews. He goes directly to CBS. And they say, hey, Rod, love the concept. What's the concept going to be called? The Twilight Zone. Okay, it sounds okay, The Twilight Zone. And that debuts in 1959, lasts 5 years. He gets his start with Lucy and Desi. And The Untouchables. There's Robert Stack, third in from the left. I once spent the night with Robert Stack at the baseball game. Him and Terry Garrett used to come to Yankee games all the time. He had nothing to say, absolutely nothing to say. It's like Elliot Ness. Desilu, the Playhouse, aired a 2-part drama called The Untouchables. Paul Monish adapted the 1957 memoirs of the ultimate G-Man, Elliot Ness, who was played by Stack. CBS, I don't like the show. They go to ABC, fledgling network, half a network at that time. And they say, yeah, we'll take it. Ran for 4 seasons. Big hit for them. The split comes in 1960. Lucy has decided it's over and she wants to move on with her life. She files for divorce in 1960, says Desi, she charged Desi extreme cruelty, subjected her to grievous mental suffering. I've tried so hard to be fair and solve our problems, but now I find it's impossible to go on. But the split was amicable. They remained friends, and they were friends to the end, at least Desi's end, and business partners. The Lucy Show, 1962. Lucy comes back. She's a widower, and she comes back with Vivian Vance. The Lucy Show. Desilu was on the ropes because there's no Lucy product anymore. The End Southern show is canceled. Angel and Guest Ward Ho canceled. It's just the Untouchables. And Desi is looking at the bottom line, calls Lucy one day and says, hey, we got to get back to work. Our business is failing. Got to get CBS to pump some money into Desilu. CBS wasn't interested, but it's Lucy. Okay, well, let's do the show. But there were some conditions attached. Vivian Vance has to come back, and the show has to be on Monday nights, 8 o'clock Eastern time. Oh, and by the way, well, we're going to be roommates, me and Vivian, kind of like the Odd Couple later on. Vance's character is the first divorced woman on primetime television, which was an amazing feat back in 1962 because everybody lived such great lives. Leave it to Beaver. Ozzy, did Ozzy ever work on Ozzy and Harriet? No, we don't know what he did. Father Knows Best, the Donna Reed Show. And here we got the first divorced character in a widow on the Lucy Show. And there is the sidekick, Vivian Vance. In 1962, shortly after the debut of the show and money coming in, does he say, hey, listen, Lucy, explain, can you buy me out? And she does. $2.5 million, about $20 million today, and she gets 350 shares of the stock. Maybe in happier days, Desi and Lucy. In 1962, November, she buys them out. She becomes the first woman to have a major studio and one of the most powerful women in not only in Hollywood, but in the United States at the time, business-wise. She's a powerhouse, and people have to play ball with her. Her first venture is something called Fractured Flickers, which was great for me as a kid because I used to love watching Dudley Do-Right, not necessarily Dudley Do-Right, but Snidely Whiplash as part of the Rocky and Bullwinkle package. And they decided so some of the cartoons should be repackaged for syndication under the name Fractured Flickers, which I watched as a kid. And that was her first venture into syndication. She kept all the people around that she and Desi had hired, and for the most part, she relied on their advice, except for, well, one idea, and she came up with one other idea. We're going to do the show, the Here's Lucy show, starting in 1963 in color. Her hair is red. The reason why? Because she knew the show was going to come to an end one day, and she figured the show would be more valuable in color then black and white in reruns. And she probably was right initially. And so she decided to tell CBS it's going to be in color. And CBS, no, we can't do it. We're not pushing color transmission of shows. They had the ability to do it. She did it anyway. You saw it in black and white. CBS continued to broadcast all of its shows in black and white until September of 1965. Because NBC was doing it, ABC was doing it, why shouldn't they? The last Beatles appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show, singing Help, black and white, not in color. September 65, they would switch to color. Desilu would have these proposals coming across the desk, Mission Impossible, or the director said, sounds good. Lucy says, sounds good. Mannix, sounds good. Lucy said, yeah, sounds good. We'll develop them. We'll get them on. They do. Oh, this one, Star Trek. I don't know about that. It's too much money, way, way too much money. Let's talk about it. Well, there's Shatner and there's Spock and the rest of the crew, where no man has ever gone before, or maybe we should say no woman has ever gone before. Lucille Ball has these proposals. Gene Roddenberry has Star Trek and Mission Impossible. Star Trek is going to be a bear. It is going to cost a ton of money to film. But Lucy decides, yeah, let's give it a go. That guy, Leonard Nimoy, the half Martian, half Vulcan. NBC liked it. Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry explained to Lucy, it's Wagon Train to the Stars, because she initially thought it was about USO performers going from Army bases to Navy bases performing. And then Roddenberry explained, it's Wagon Train to the Stars. Board of directors said, we can't do it. Can't do it, it's going to bankrupt us. Lucy said, we're going to do it. No, we can't. I'm the boss. You just work for me. Do it. They do. Network TV was not interested. At least NBC wasn't. The board members felt the same way. Lucy didn't. After The Cage is rejected, NBC says, yeah, you know, The Cage, yeah, we didn't like the puppet. We liked that guy. Boston's own Leonard Nimoy. Leonard Nimoy grew up, his father Max was the neighborhood barber by one of my best friends who passed away 2 years ago, Shelley Saltman from that area, who would be 90 years old, was telling me that he went to high school with Barbara Walters and Barry Moss, and he was best buddies with Leonard Nimoy growing up, and then his mother played Marjan with Leonard Bernstein's mother, along with David Suskind's mother. And all the women used to look at Mrs. Bernstein and say, oh, that Lenny, he's so good looking, he's so smart, he's so personal. Why is he playing around with this music thing? He's never going to amount to anything. They were wrong, as was the board of directors about this guy. The pilot, The Cage, flopped. But NBC said, get Leonard Nimoy back. We like that character, half Martian, half human. And let's have a second pilot, which came to be known as Where No Man Has Ever Gone Before, but you could say no woman has gone before, because she was the boss. Spock's character only remained from the first pilot. Lucy said, here's the money, go shoot it. The board of directors said, no. At the end of the day, who is correct? Lucy. She knew talent. The board of directors, In 1967, she would sell Desilu to Gulf and Gulf and Western for $17 million, about $170 million now, which is cheap. She sells it to the company that also acquired Paramount Pictures. Today it's called CBS Television Studios. They have a piece of Jeopardy. She would have her own production company starting in 1968. She'd come up with a new series for herself, Here's Lucy. The program would run till 1974. She teaches 8 weeks worth of comedy classes at Cal State Northridge, just north of Los Angeles in 1977. Her last successful venture was a movie that she produced, Tom Cruise movie called All the Right Moves. She was the co-executive producer. Her second husband, Gary Morton, the producer. Philip Goldfarb and Stephen Deutsch were the other producers. It's about a teenager who is a high school star in football, and he wants a scholarship so he can attend college. The goal to avoid ending up like his father and brother who worked in the steel mills. There would be one more Lucy venture with Gail Gordon at roughly the same time. It was an absolute failure. Lucy was 75 years old, 76 years old at that point, and it just didn't work. Her last appearance, the 78-year-old Lucille Ball, was at the Oscars in Los Angeles. A few weeks later, she would die of a heart attack. And that should be the end of the story, but it's not. As my old pal, and I used to speak at his museum yearly, twice a year, 3 times a year, The philosopher Lawrence Peter Yogi Berra used to say, "Ain't over until it's over." I Love Lucy, more than the slogan, according to Desi Arnaz and probably CBS. Lucille Ball paved the way for women to be taken seriously in business in the 1950s and 1960s. I don't know how seriously they took her, but she was Lucy, and she ran the studio with an iron fist. She was the artistic head of Desilu. Oh, and I Love Lucy, still making CBS money more than 64 years after its final original show. The last time CBS talked about how much money the show made was in 2012. CBS president Les Moonves said the show was making the company 2012, 9 years ago, $20 million annually. Ain't over yet. Ain't over until it's over. Lucy's not done yet. There's going to be a biopic coming out on Netflix later this year, done by the guy on the left, Aaron Sorkin, and Nicole Kidman is playing Lucy. It's called Being the Ricardos, and it takes place over the course of a week during the production of I Love Lucy. They haven't told which one, probably the communist one, or maybe the Confidential magazine one, which sees Lucy and Desi encounter a crisis that could jeopardize their careers and their marriage. Nicole Kidman, Javier Bardem are the stars, the biopic being written by Aaron Sorkin. And I want to thank Mary Lou for inviting me and everybody else who is here. Questions, comment time. I'm all yours, or the floor is all yours.
Questions?
Questions or comments? Comments, Bev, I love Lucy. Nobody has anything to say about Lucy? Turn the mic on. Gotta turn on those mics.
Thank you so much, Evan.
Any questions or comments about Lucy?
No, I guess not.
Do they still love Lucy?
They're all chatting together about it right now, but
Oh, okay. Well,
I guess they don't have any questions.
I guess that's the point, right? To get them to talk to one another. So anyway, well, I want to thank you, Mary Lou, for inviting me. I don't know if we're going to do this again or not, but I've enjoyed the two opportunities that we've done. I don't know how things are going to go in the fall. I know that some people have told me that they plan to continue in the fall and the winter, particularly on days where the weather is going to be nasty. So hopefully we can do something again in the future.
That would be nice.
Yeah, your mic is on. It's not on.
Again, I'm going back and forth with a few different devices today. I apologize for the, it's so funny because I stayed last night to get it up on the screen. Everything worked perfectly. And then today just would not work.
Murphy's Law. What can go wrong will go wrong.
You know how that is. It's so frustrating. But anyway, they were able to watch a bunch. I think there were about 10 people here, and then there were some actually on Zoom, and we did record it to show. So
yeah,
more people
that'll be good. So anyway, well, again, Mary Lou, thank you, and hopefully we could do this again in the future.
I hope so. I really appreciate that. Was so interesting. A lot of things I didn't know, but it was really good.
It revolutionized TV. It may be the most important television show in American history.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Not for the content either.
Well, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day today.
Well,
stay cool.
I got one more talk coming, and I got a few things I got to do. So next thing I got to do is go work out.
All right. Well, stay cool. Thank you.
Okay. Take care. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.